A $500 million deal hung by a thread, wrapped in the imposing luxury of a private dining room at the Imperial Plaza Hotel in New York. On one side of the table sat two American executives, sharp as blades. On the other, an enigmatic South Korean millionaire, Min Park, who refused to speak English. Between them moved an almost invisible figure, one who would prove decisive in the outcome of the night, the waitress. The air was thick, heavy, as if it could be cut with the silver knives lined across the table. The Imperial Plaza's private restaurant did not simply serve meals, it served demonstrations of power. Mahogany walls gleamed like mirrors, a crystal chandelier dripped light onto the table like frozen drops, and a panoramic window displayed New York as though it were a chessboard laid at their feet. The American executives looked at the Asian millionaire and mistook his silence for weakness, his foreign words for meaningless noise. They smirked with disdain, whispered in low voices, convinced they were in control. What they did not realize was that in this gilded room, every gesture and every lie was being observed by someone they never noticed, someone weaving quietly between trays and glasses, with the grace of a doe and the sharp eyes of an eagle. On one side sat Gregory Hale and Ethan Cross. Gregory, CEO of Hale Capital, was a man in his 50s with silver hair and a polished smile. He exuded the aura of inherited power, the air of a man accustomed to victory. Beside him was Ethan, his vice president, the younger and hungrier version, flawless suit, quick smile, and eyes that glimmered with ravenous ambition. At the far end of the table sat the source of the tension, Min Park. Labeled by newspapers as the Asian millionaire, he was 62, owner of a multi-billion-dollar biotechnology conglomerate. His black hair, streaked with white, was combed back in a simple, almost austere manner. His dark gray suit was immaculate yet free of ostentation. His calm, serene face was a mask that betrayed no emotion. Seated discreetly beside him was his interpreter, ready to transform Korean words into clipped English phrases. The problem began the moment Min spoke. It wasn't the heavily accented English sentences Gregory and Ethan had expected. Instead, it was rapid syllables in Korean, soft, melodic, yet to them, completely incomprehensible. "The Mr. Park thanks you for your hospitality," the interpreter said, reducing the reply to something dry and simplified. Gregory forced a laugh. Of course. Tell him we are honored." As appetizers were served small scallops on lemon cream, the conversation continued in the same rhythm, lengthy, promise-laden speeches from the executives, reduced to terse translations, responses in Korean, boiled down into brief summaries in English. It was like trying to play tennis against a brick wall. And gliding through the room, discreet as a shadow, was the waitress, Emily Carter. To everyone else in that room, she was merely the server in a black uniform, tasked with filling glasses and clearing plates. Invisible to the eyes of the powerful. No one imagined that, on this night, this improbable figure could alter the course of everything. Dinner crept forward slowly, like a silent game of chess. The faint clink of cutlery, the fizz of freshly poured champagne, and the constant shuffle of servers tried to mask the weight pressing down on the table. The waitress moved among the chairs with the trained posture of someone who had mastered invisibility. 23-year-old Emily, in her immaculate black uniform, wore a serene expression, but her eyes missed nothing. To the executives, she was just another employee of the Imperial Plaza Hotel. Only she knew that behind the silver tray she carried, there were also memories of a season spent in South Korea, experiences that returned in flashes, like a discreet light glowing at the far edge of the room. At the head of the table, Gregory Hale radiated power. His silver hair neatly combed, his skin bronzed from more time at resorts than in boardrooms, and his tailored Italian suit all painted the portrait of a man used to victory. At his side was the inseparable Ethan Cross, younger, restless, his gaze darting constantly. Unlike Gregory, who cultivated rehearsed calm, Ethan was impatient, drumming his fingers, leaning forward, flashing smiles as sharp as blades. At the far end of the table sat the enigmatic Min Park. The South Korean millionaire held his body upright, almost motionless, as if in meditation. His dark eyes revealed neither haste nor insecurity, only observation. His charcoal gray suit was sober, free of ostentation, a stark contrast to the gleaming watches and flashy ties of the American executives. Between them, as the unavoidable bridge, was the interpreter. Young, well-groomed, of Korean descent, he adjusted his glasses discreetly before speaking. With each sentence, he seemed to weigh the words, deciding what was worth translating. "Mr. Park thanks you for the warm reception," he said after a long, rhythmic statement from the millionaire. Emily, approaching with a bottle of wine, didn't understand every word in Korean, but she caught the tone. There was irony in Park's cadence, something that didn't match the interpreter's flat translation. She couldn't explain why, but the difference struck her like a wrong note in a symphony. Gregory lifted his glass and smiled with the confidence of a man who believed he was steering the game. "Excellent. Tell him this is only the beginning of a partnership that will change the future." The interpreter relayed the phrase, Park responded calmly, and again the translation came back simplified, almost hollow. Emily set the bottle down on the sideboard and drew a deep breath. Her intuition told her far more was being said than the executives were hearing. Ethan leaned toward Gregory, his voice muffled behind a hand covering his mouth. "He looks lost. He doesn't understand a word. It's only a matter of time before he accepts the terms." Gregory nodded, his satisfied smile impossible to hide. "Then stay the course. We'll have his signature soon enough." Emily pretended to arrange the silverware on a side table, but every muscle was alert. The contract hadn't even been opened, yet something already felt wrong. And, as absurd as it seemed, she, the invisible waitress, was the only one in that room who sensed it. Dinner unfolded like a silent stage play, every line rehearsed, every gesture measured. But to those who knew how to watch, the tension was in the details, the restrained clink of cutlery, the calculated gaze of each executive, the weighted silence of the South Korean millionaire. Emily Carter moved between tables with steady, controlled steps. To the eyes of those present, she was nothing more than the waitress, young, efficient, invisible. Yet behind the starched black uniform was a story marked by sacrifice. She was only 23, but she had already learned what it meant to give up dreams for the sake of family. During a study abroad program in South Korea, she had glimpsed another world. She studied, learned the language, discovered new perspectives. But when her father fell ill, Emily gave it all up and returned home. Now she worked long nights at the Imperial Plaza Hotel, torn between exhaustion and the desire to one day reclaim the life she had once imagined. She carried no bitterness, but within her was a blend of resilience and sensitivity. Serving tables draped in luxury, she listened to wealthy men speak of power while thinking of the overdue bills her mother struggled to pay at home. That gulf between worlds sometimes made her feel small, but never broken. There was a quiet strength in her, the same strength that allowed her to hear what others ignored. At the other end of the table, seated with the composure of a king on his throne, was Min-Jun Park. 62 years old, founder of a biotechnology empire that had changed countless lives. Unlike the American executives who flaunted gold watches and loud ties, Park wore a discreet dark gray suit. He had nothing to prove. His black eyes, serene, resembled a calm ocean on the surface, yet deep and filled with hidden currents. As Emily poured wine, she studied him in silence. They were worlds apart, separated by continents, money, and age, but there was an invisible thread connecting them, the conviction that character outweighed appearances. Emily, with her courage tucked beneath the routine of a waitress. Park, with his calm that stripped arrogance of its armor. The interpreter stood as the bridge between sides, but it was a flawed one. Young, polished, he delivered only watered-down versions of Park's words. Emily couldn't catch everything, but she recognized the cadence, the clipped phrases. This wasn't simple translation, it was filtration. As if someone wanted to conceal the true force of what was being said. Gregory Hale, one of the executives negotiating with the millionaire, wore a rehearsed smile and seemed to notice nothing. He raised toasts, spoke loudly about social impact, while Ethan Cross, his business partner, was always restless, whispering about clauses and profits. To them, Park was merely an obstacle to be maneuvered around, a foreigner trapped behind linguistic walls. But Emily, quietly arranging the silverware on a side table, knew something didn't fit. Perhaps it was in the calculated pauses of the millionaire, or in the subtle glances he cast, that made her believe this man saw far more than he allowed to show. And suddenly, she had the strange feeling that, although they came from different worlds, she and Minjun Park shared the same awareness. In the end, truth always finds a way to reveal itself. Dinner advanced like a silent stage play, every line rehearsed, every gesture measured. Yet for those who knew how to watch, the tension lived in the details, in the restrained clink of cutlery, in the calculated looks of the executives, in the meaningful silence of the foreign millionaire. At the other end of the table, seated with the composure of a king upon his throne, was Minjun Park. 62 years old, founder of a biotechnology empire that had changed thousands of lives. Unlike the American executives, who flaunted gold watches and loud ties, Park wore a discreet charcoal gray suit. He had nothing to prove to anyone. His black eyes, serene, resembled a calm ocean on the surface, but one filled with deep, hidden currents. As Emily poured wine, she observed him in silence. They were worlds apart, separated by continents, money, and age, but there was an invisible thread connecting them, the conviction that character outweighed appearance. Emily, with her courage tucked beneath the routine of a waitress. Park, with his calm that disarmed arrogance. Emily drew a deep breath, her face neutral as she cleared the plates from the appetizers. Inside, though, she felt as if she had stumbled upon a dangerous secret. The millionaire was not saying what the executives believed he was saying. The translations were masks, hiding sharp barbs behind polished words. But what could she do with that? She was just the waitress. No one expected her to speak, no one even noticed she was there. Her role was to serve in silence, and any deviation could cost her the job, a job her family depended on to survive. Still, each distorted response echoed within her like a muffled cry. Emily remembered her time studying in Seoul, the conversations with professors and classmates, the weight they placed on words. To Minjun Park, every syllable carried honor. To see them corrupted by the interpreter was almost an insult. Gregory took the floor, filling the room with his confident tone. "Tell Mr. Park this partnership isn't just about business. It's about trust. He will have in us long-term allies." The interpreter relayed the phrase. The millionaire listened silently before replying. Emily was close, replacing the cutlery at the far end of the table, when she clearly heard, "Trust cannot be bought with empty promises. It is proven in actions." But what came from the interpreter's mouth was, "He says he values your vision for the future." Ethan slapped the table, triumphant. "Perfect. He's on our side." Emily nearly choked on her own breath. No, he wasn't. The millionaire was rejecting the proposal, though indirectly. And yet, thanks to the interpreter, Gregory and Ethan celebrated as if they had already won. The waitress walked to the sideboard, trying to steady her racing heart. Questions flashed through her mind like lightning. Should she speak? Should she expose what she knew? But who would believe her, a simple employee? And what if she was wrong? Minjun, for his part, seemed calm. He watched the executives as though analyzing not just their words, but the truths revealed in every gesture. There was a disconcerting serenity in his silence, as if the real game had not yet begun. Emily found herself at a crossroads: remain invisible, protected by anonymity, or risk everything to reveal the truth. Something inside her whispered that, sooner or later, the choice would no longer be hers. The doors opened softly, and a new round of dishes entered the room as if part of a choreographed performance. The waiters marched in formation, carrying silver platters that released delicate aromas. Small lamb medallions with an herb crust were set on fine porcelain plates, flanked by meticulously carved vegetables. The refinement was part of the performance. Every detail declared that millionaire destinies were being decided here. Emily moved naturally among the guests, balancing trays, changing cutlery, refilling glasses. Her face remained serene, but inside, the discrepancy in the translations still echoed. With each step, she felt the weight of truth grow heavier within her, as though she were carrying far more than porcelain plates. Gregory tasted a piece of meat and spoke with the rehearsed calm of someone convinced he controlled the situation. "Tell Mr. Park we understand his reservations. But this contract ensures security for everyone. It's a chance to join forces." The interpreter conveyed the message. The millionaire set his cutlery down with elegance, dabbed his lips with the napkin, and replied in Korean. His voice, low and firm, sounded almost like a verdict. "Emily, approaching to pour the wine, caught enough, join forces? With men who treat promises like disposable coins?" The translation, once again, came out diluted. "He says he appreciates your spirit of collaboration." Ethan leaned toward Gregory, smiling with superiority. "It's in the bag. A few more minutes and he'll sign." Emily felt her breath falter. This was no longer mere distortion, it was betrayal. The millionaire wasn't agreeing to anything. On the contrary, he seemed to be rejecting every word. But who in that room would believe her? Then it happened. As she served the wine to Minjun's right, Emily lifted her eyes for the briefest moment. And the millionaire, who until then had seemed detached from everything, shifted his gaze from the papers and looked directly at her. It lasted less than a second. But it was enough. In Minjun's serene eyes, Emily saw something she hadn't expected. He noticed her. Not as the invisible waitress, but as someone who understood. There was a silent question there, as if he were probing how far she would go with what she knew. Emily, startled, dropped her gaze at once. But her heart pounded in her chest. She felt as though an invisible thread had been tied between them. A connection that needed no words. On the other side of the table, Gregory raised his glass. To the beginning of a promising partnership. Emily stepped back slowly, but her mind was no longer calm. That fraction of a second had changed everything. The millionaire knew. And now she was certain, this night would not end in silence. Emily returned from the sideboard with measured steps, still feeling the weight of the glance she had shared with the millionaire moments earlier. It was like carrying a secret burning inside her, demanding to be revealed. But before she could steady herself, a rigid presence appeared at her side. "Miss Carter," a cutting voice made her flinch. "What do you think you're doing?" It was the restaurant manager, Mr. Whitmore, a middle-aged man with military posture and a severe gaze. His dark jacket draped over broad shoulders, and every gesture seemed calculated to intimidate. He approached discreetly, but his low tone carried the force of an accusation. "You're lingering too long at the table." His eyes dropped to the tray Emily held. "And straighten your posture. This isn't some corner diner." Emily lowered her gaze, biting back the urge to respond. "Yes, sir," she murmured, adjusting her stance and stepping away. The manager leaned closer, almost growling. "Remember, you're here to serve, not to eavesdrop. Stay invisible." Emily's cheeks flushed, not from the reprimand itself, but because deep down, he was partly right. She wasn't just being a waitress. She was listening, observing. She was seeing what no one else could. Across the table, Gregory spoke about market projections, Ethan reinforced inflated numbers, and the interpreter kept shaping words until they became unrecognizable. The millionaire listened in silence, his expression unchanged, as if it were all part of a performance he knew by heart. Emily stepped back, obeying the order, but couldn't resist one last quick glance. To her surprise, she once again found Minjun's eyes. It lasted only a fraction of a second, but it was enough to sense something unsettling. He had also seen the manager scolding her. And in that silent gaze, there seemed to be a mutual understanding. As if they were saying, without words, some men may try to silence us, but truth always finds a way out. Emily swallowed hard and looked away. The dilemma grew inside her like an impossible knot. Remain invisible, obeying the manager and protecting her job, or risk everything to stop the injustice unfolding before her eyes? The atmosphere in the room thickened like invisible smoke. The interpreter continued to soften sharp words, turning criticism into praise and irony into lukewarm phrases. Emily, circulating with a tray of glasses, felt her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then she heard it clearly. The millionaire, with his usual unshakable calm, said in Korean, "Men blinded by ambition do not notice when they walk toward the abyss." The words struck Emily like lightning. But what the interpreter translated was, "He says he is confident this will be a path to prosperity." Emily froze. The shock of the discrepancy was so strong that the tray slipped slightly in her hands. The metallic sound of two glasses tipping against the silver echoed through the room. They didn't shatter, but it was enough to freeze every gaze upon her. The manager appeared like a shadow, quick, relentless. "Miss Carter," he hissed through clenched teeth, though everyone could hear. "I told you not to linger at the table. And now this? Posture, posture." Emily bent quickly to collect the glasses, her face burning. She felt everyone's eyes on her, Gregory with disdain, Ethan with sarcasm, the interpreter with thinly veiled irritation. But there was another gaze. The gaze of the millionaire. Min-jun watched her in silence, his eyes serene, almost curious. There was no judgment in them, only a strange understanding. As if, in the midst of her embarrassment, he saw the truth the others ignored. As she rose, Emily was suddenly seized by a memory, her father's voice, years earlier, on a quiet afternoon in their backyard. "Truth is like light, Emily. It may blind for a moment, it may bring difficult consequences. But in the end, it's always better than living in the shadow of a lie." The memory warmed her chest, but was quickly suffocated by the weight of reality. Her father was sick, her mother depended on her paycheck to cover rent and medicine. Losing this job could be disastrous. Emily drew a deep breath, steadying her trembling hands. Before her lay two roads: remain silent, protect her job, pretend she saw nothing, or honor her father's words and face the risk, even if it cost her everything. At the head of the table, Gregory raised his glass with confidence, while Ethan whispered about their certain victory. But Emily knew there was a fracture, an abyss about to open. And perhaps she was the only one who could prevent the lie from triumphing. A heavy silence settled over the table after the tray slipped. The sharp clink of the glasses on the silver still seemed to echo in the air, even though they had been quickly cleared and replaced. Emily, the waitress, felt her heart pounding so hard she believed everyone around her could hear it. The manager, rigid as ever, stood against the wall, arms crossed, his eyes like blades fixed on her, ready to cut at the slightest mistake. Gregory and Ethan returned to the conversation, but their tone had shifted. There was no longer only corporate coldness in their words, there was irritation. They tried to mask it with calculated smiles, but their eyes betrayed them. They knew Min-jun wasn't yielding as they had hoped. And worse, there was a new variable in the room, a detail the millionaire hadn't overlooked. Then it happened. Emily approached the table discreetly, carrying another dish, sea bass with beurre blanc, potato gnocchi, and wild mushrooms. The aroma was subtle and refined, a masterpiece of French cuisine. As she placed the plate before Min-jun, her eyes sought his, as if disobeying the command to remain neutral. And the millionaire, in turn, seemed to answer her silent signal, looking back at her once more. That fraction of a second was enough. Emily saw in the millionaire's eyes something no one else seemed to notice: exhaustion mingled with clarity. He was tired of the performance, yet he held firm. Across from him, Min-jun perceived in her a flicker of conflict, a restrained energy aching to break free. It was as if, without words, they recognized one another. Richard noticed the glance and laughed mockingly. "She's taking her time, Min-jun. Maybe she's enchanted by you." William added awkwardly, trying to turn the tension into a joke. "American girls are always impressed by powerful men." Emily swallowed hard. Blood rushed to her face, but she kept silent. The manager, however, stepped forward and hissed through clenched teeth. "Finish quickly, Emily. You've already crossed the line." She stepped back, but every cell in her body burned. She wanted to scream. She wanted to say she understood every word Minjun spoke in Korean, that the interpreter was softening truths, twisting intentions, and that those men, so powerful in appearance, were nothing more than predators eager for the blood of a billion-dollar deal. And yet, her father's voice echoed in her memory. He had often repeated to her when she was a teenager. "Emily, truth is like the wind. It can topple trees, raise dust, but it also brings relief. Don't fear what it may cause, fear the weight of silencing it." The contrast was cruel. On one side, her father's teachings, a reminder of integrity and courage; on the other, harsh reality. Her mother needed expensive medicine since falling ill. Bills piled up. And this job, suffocating as it was her only source of income. Emily felt torn, as if two versions of herself battled inside, the submissive waitress who should remain invisible, and the young woman who carried within her an unbreakable sense of justice. Minjun, calmly slicing the fine fish on his plate, cast her a furtive glance. And in that look was something more, a silent invitation. As if to say, "I know you understand me. The question is, will you have the courage to reveal yourself?" The knot in Emily's stomach tightened. She knew that, in just a few moments, she would have to choose. The atmosphere in the dining room was no longer one of refinement, but of silent war. The main courses lay almost untouched, meals cooling on expensive porcelain, while sharp words replaced the cutlery with cold, cutting noise. Richard leaned forward, fingers drumming on the table. "Mr. Park, let's be direct. The market is ruthless. Accept the proposal and we all walk away winners." The interpreter translated bluntly, but Emily clearly heard the millionaire's response in Korean before it was softened. To win without honor is just another name for losing. Her stomach churned. The interpreter twisted the words into. "He says he has concerns about some details of the proposal." The waitress felt the weight of injustice. This wasn't just poor translation, it was manipulation. They were turning truth into convenience. William, now impatient, slammed his glass against the table. "Philosophy doesn't pay bills, Mr. Park. Numbers do." Minjun didn't raise his voice. He spoke softly, but every syllable carried steel. "A man may be measured by the size of his bank account, but he will be remembered by the size of his word." Emily shivered. This was more than an argument. It was a code of life. And there lay the cruel contradiction: two executives trained to exploit weaknesses, against a man who still believed in principles. The manager, watching closely, noticed Emily's tension and growled. "Go back to the kitchen. Stay in your place." But she already knew she couldn't turn her back. Every memory of her sick mother, every sleepless night working to support the household, every piece of her father's advice about truth and courage, all of it converged on this moment. She took a deep breath. Her legs trembled, but she didn't retreat. She was no longer just a waitress serving expensive plates. She stood before the choice that would change everything. Emily set the tray down on the sideboard with trembling hands. The room looked the same, but for her, the world had shifted. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the clinking of silverware and glasses. Each step she took toward the table seemed to multiply by 10. The Persian carpet, soft beneath her feet, had turned into an endless corridor, as though the distance to the millionaire were infinite. For a moment, she thought of turning back, hiding in the kitchen, taking the manager's scolding, and pretending nothing had happened. But her father's words returned like a voice inside her: truth is more important than the consequences. The fear was suffocating. What if she was about to ruin everything? What if Minjun looked at her with contempt? What if the executives ridiculed her, making her even more invisible? Sweat trickled down her neck. The air felt thin, each breath an effort. In the background, Richard's forced laughter sounded like mockery. The manager's stern gaze burned into her back. Her mind screamed, "You'll lose your job, you'll destroy the little you have." And yet, something greater pulsed inside her. It was as if she carried not only herself, but the memory of every moment she had been silenced, diminished, ignored. Each step was heavy as lead, but also carried the strength of years of silence about to burst. When she finally reached the table, Emily felt her legs might give way. The voices stopped. Everyone stared: Richard, irritated; William, confused; the manager, red with fury. And at the center, Minjun, calm, attentive, as if he had been waiting for exactly this moment. Emily swallowed hard. Her voice came out trembling, yet clear. In flawless Korean, she broke the silence. "Sir, they are hiding clauses in the contract. They are trying to buy your company and bury your legacy." The impact was immediate. The interpreter went pale, choking on his own breath. William nearly dropped his wineglass. Richard's eyes widened as if he had seen a ghost. The manager exploded. "Emily! You're fired. Get your things this instant." But she did not back down. With a steady voice, she translated every hidden detail: the concealed article about patents, the non-compete clause, the trap disguised as formality. Each word was a blade, stripping the masks from the executives. Minjun remained motionless, listening to the very end. Then he set down his cutlery, dabbed his lips with the napkin, and rose calmly. Authority weighed in every gesture. First he looked at Richard and William, now pale as marble. Then he turned to Emily. "Courage," he said, in heavily accented but firm English. "That cannot be bought. It can only be recognized." He closed the leather folder holding the contract and handed it to the interpreter, who didn't dare meet his gaze. Then he addressed the executives with a voice of steel. "The negotiation is over. What you tried to do is not only dishonest. It is unforgivable." Richard tried to react. "Wait, Mr. Park, it's not what it seems." But the response cut like a knife. "I do not do business with thieves." The manager stood frozen, swallowing hard. Ignoring him, Minjun stepped closer to Emily. She trembled, but did not look away. He studied her for a moment, then said, "You saved more than a contract. You saved my trust." Emily could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had lost her job, she knew that, but in that instant, something far greater was happening. Turning to the manager, Minjun declared, "She no longer works for this restaurant. From today on, she works for me." A sepulchral silence fell over the room. Emily felt tears well in her eyes. She had never felt so vulnerable and at the same time, so seen. Richard and William hurriedly gathered their belongings, tripping over their excuses, and left in humiliation. The interpreter followed, head bowed. The manager remained frozen, his authority deflated like a punctured balloon. Emily, stunned, whispered only, "But, why me?" Minjun allowed a rare smile. "Because you did what everyone here feared, you chose truth, despite the consequences. That is worth more than any fortune." He extended his hand, not as a businessman offering a contract, but as a man offering trust. Emily accepted. And in that moment, she understood, her life would never be the same. What happened that night was not merely the end of a billion-dollar negotiation. It was the revelation of something far greater, that courage can arise from the most unlikely place, from someone the world insists on overlooking. Emily was not just a waitress. She was proof that integrity and truth still hold power in a world dominated by appearances and greed. And Minjun was not just a South Korean millionaire. He showed that wealth without honor is a castle built on sand. That true power lies in recognizing the worth of those who, though invisible, have the courage to speak when everyone else remains silent. Perhaps that is the lesson for all of us: never underestimate those who seem small, nor ignore the voice that chooses truth despite fear. Because, often, it is those quiet voices that change the course of history. If this story touched you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories that reveal hidden strength where we least expect it.